Hey people, Iron here. The Infinity Saga for the Marvel Cinematic Universe has ended, leaving the franchise in a transition period, with Phase 4 introducing audiences to the Multiverse Saga. Some fans are less than lukewarm about the projects that have come out over the Phase's 2 years, and I wanted to cover each of them to share my thoughts and rank the MCU's Phase 4. Some things to note are I'll be going in chronological order, covering the shows, specials, and movies. Counting entries, I place closer to the left side of the tier as ranked slightly higher than others on its tier. All of this is my opinion, and of course, spoilers ahead. Let's get into this. Starting off the ranking, we have Wandavision. Right off the bat, I enjoyed this show, from the different decade-themed episodes to diving more into Wanda and Vision's characters, now that they have their own time to shine. That being said, Wanda got more of the emotional depth and backstory in this show compared to Vision, but I enjoyed a more lighthearted and comedic Vision. I think this was the perfect project to release right after the long MCU hiatus from COVID. The series is fun, emotional, nostalgic, and has a wide appeal. On the other hand, I do have to address the elephant in the room, which was the finale. People online tended to really hate this last episode. However, while I thought it wasn't terrible, it definitely didn't stick the landing, and that hurt people's perspectives on the show. The CGI Sky Showdown, this dude, and Wanda's message at the end, excusing herself from the harm she put on the town, just left a bad taste. I will say, what I enjoyed from the finale was Vision's philosophical mind games with White Vision, Wanda succeeding by learning from her opponent Agatha's powers, and the overall theme of grief and letting go. While the finale of WandaVision wasn't top tier, the show as a whole is some of the best from Phase 4. A tier. Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Now this was the Disney Plus show I was most looking forward to when the first 3 Marvel shows were shown in a Super Bowl ad. I liked both Falcon and Bucky as characters, and I was looking forward to this series the most, and I was disappointed. I'll cut to the chase. My biggest problem with this show is the villain and how the hero agrees with them.
I agree with your fight.
The hero can't agree with the villain for conflict to happen. Said villain is Flag Smasher, whose dastardly evil plan is to distribute vaccines and make sure people aren't on the streets? Wait, what's wrong with that? They aren't even a villain at all. Sure, they beat up some guards and shake the boat up, but that's when they started killing people. The nonsensical shift in goals from the villain paired with military righteousness and bland episodes, both visually and story-wise, lands the series low in my ranking. The US agent, or John Walker, was handled well up until the end when he was redeemed for some reason. As for positive qualities, I love this Captain America suit that was translated very well into live action. This was a cool scene, and Zemo dancing was fun. But that's not enough to save this show. With all these projects, one of them's gotta fall short. D tier. Loki. This is undoubtedly my favorite Disney Plus show from Marvel so far. I will admit when I heard they were making a Loki show, I wasn't very excited at first. I bet you're starting to notice a theme here. But bringing in the TVA and having Loki go on missions across time and space, it was a wild ride. Sophie DiMartino, Tom Hiddleston, and especially Owen Wilson shine in their roles, and I can't get enough of these characters. I usually watch Marvel movies for the action spectacles, but I was entertained just listening to these two talk on their lunch break. Outstanding job once again from casting director Sarah Haley Finn, who has worked on nearly every single MCU project. She deserves as much praise as Kevin Feige and Stan Lee for building the MCU. The episode where Loki and Sylvie have to get off a planet before it's destroyed and ultimately fail is brilliant. The romance was pretty good even though it was basically the same person falling for themselves, which is funny. My biggest complaint with this show is the stakes don't feel very high because whenever a character gets killed, they are still fine and magically come back, or psych, weren't dead in the first place, despite having been heavily implied. That though is really more of a complaint of the MCU and comics as a whole. The finale was great with Jonathan Majors King just absolutely chewing the scene. As for his altercation with a partner in real life, I'm not going to get into that, but I hope everyone's okay. Back to the show, the ending really set the stakes for the entire saga and made me excited for more multiverse time-hopping adventures going forward in Season 2. Great show, S tier. Black Widow. Now this movie gets a bad rap. I think it's pretty good. It's nothing groundbreaking, but it was a fun summer blockbuster. The core casts were all likable, had good chemistry, and worked as a sort of older family. I don't think this family was as believable as another on the list, but I'll get into that later. Florence Pugh's Yelena was a standout character, looking up to Natasha as a younger sibling would, yet still being a badass herself. One of the biggest problems with this movie was the timing of its release. It takes place just after Civil War, which came out and was canonically set in 2016. Combine that with audiences already knowing Black Widow died in Endgame, just begs the question why they waited so long to make it. Aside from that, the film's other big issue is that the story wasn't really about Natasha. Yeah, it told her backstory, but there was more of an emphasis on what surrounded her, like her family, the Black Widow program, her mission. All that had more of a focus than the struggles of the character herself. Last thing I want to note is I love the prison breakout scene with David Harbour's Red Guardian. While the movie had some significant shortcomings, it was an entertaining watch. B tier. What If? This show is underrated. I love all the creative stories that come from tweaking small details from the films. The murder mystery episode from the Avengers getting picked off one by one, the episode where Killmonger cleverly rises to power using Tony Stark, and the heartbreaking Doctor Strange episode, which is probably the best in the series, even though it's not my personal favorite. I really appreciate how these episodes were taking existing stories and turning them on their heads by bringing other characters in the universe that weren't originally in the movie. As for negatives, the show distinguishes live-action actors from trained voice actors, which is okay because most of the actors that reprise their role mainly do live-action acting, but it's apparent when they don't have as much experience voice acting because it's a whole other ballpark. I think one of the reasons this show is underrated is simply because it's animated instead of being in live action. But let's be honest, most of what's on the screen in an MCU movie is just animation and a live action art style. Some episodes don't change enough of the story to feel unique, and others just seem like they were there to fill in a slot for an episode. Despite those gripes, I thoroughly enjoy What If, and I'm excited for another season. B tier. Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. I was pleasantly surprised by this film. Going in, I didn't know anything about the character and didn't have any expectations for it. I bet you're starting to notice a theme here, but my goodness, this film was great. Choreography for the fight scenes is some of the best in the entire franchise. The characters are fleshed out and we see their motivations, and the music is a chef's kiss. I enjoy how the audience is shown new pieces of the backstory as we learn about it and fully discover Shang-Chi's past. I do think its biggest weakness is there's too much exposition, but with the magical realm and brand new characters, there has to be some explaining for it. I think it was very clever how the movie handled the Ten Rings themselves. In the comics, the Ten Rings all have their own special powers, which audiences might have found too similar to the Infinity Stones. So while the new powers might be more generic, they were still really cool to see. The themes of forging your own path pitted against being a combination of your family that came before you was handled very well. Shang-Chi is one of the best solo movies in the MCU, and to me, it's the best of Phase 4. S tier. Eternals. To me, this movie was okay. It erupted a divide between fans online whether it was amazing or horrible, but I think it was just fine. The cast is stacked from Angelina Jolie to Kumail Nanjiani and Gemma Chan to Kit Harington, but they didn't really get to shine except for maybe Kumail as Kingo. The main character, Cersei, doesn't really have much character except for being quirky, and I don't think it's the actor's fault. They're doing the best with what they're given, but the bland story with the sheer number of characters make this movie falter. The villains are the evil deviants, and the Eternals have to protect humans from the deviants because they are evil. They just show up halfway through the final fight. I will say the CGI in this movie looks astonishing, but while I don't hate the movie, it didn't do much for me. C tier. Hawkeye. This show is pretty good, and gave Hawkeye some much needed time in the spotlight. He is outshone by his successor Kate Bishop, but she's easily the best character in the show, so I don't mind. Her action scenes are great, she's funny and grows throughout the season. The interactions between her and Clint are great, and it's cool to see them just hang out. The show really banks on it's Christmas time, but it's not too excessive. What really drags this show for me again is the villains. I understand that for a Hawkeye show, the stakes can't be world-ending and the villains shouldn't be too powerful, but some gangsters in tracksuits seems a little too anticlimactic. Regardless, there are lots of great moments in the show, from the Rogers musical to the bridge chase, and Jack going crazy with his sword. While Hawkeye wasn't anything extraordinary, it was a fun ride and a solid show. B tier. Spider-Man No Way Home. This movie was exciting to watch. The amount of hype surrounding this event where all three live-action Spider-Men would share the screen was astounding. I'm glad it was still a Tom Holland-centered story, so he wasn't overshadowed by its predecessors. The three of them had great chemistry, and I'm glad there were some scenes where they just got to talk and share stories. Now, as exciting as this movie was, it doesn't really stand on its own 2 feet without knowledge of the previous Spider-Man iterations. I had a friend who, granted, isn't a huge Marvel nerd like me, but was confused when Andrew Garfield stepped through the portal. Like, who is he? I would also say the first act of the movie tends to drag aside from the tense opening scene of the city turning on Spider-Man. Willem Dafoe excels in his role as Green Goblin. I know some people wanted Green Goblin to wear the mask longer, but I'm glad they ditched it early on so we could see Dafoe's awesome facial expressions. Just look at this dude. The fight scenes were well done, brutal at times. The acting was great, and even though I have my reservations from calling it the best, Spider-Man No Way Home was truly spectacular. S tier. Moonknight. I really enjoyed this show. I liked getting to know who Mark Spector/Stephen Grant is. Seeing a relatively normal life of someone in the MCU was cool, and then seeing them become more intertwined with their condition and getting stronger as Moon Knight was great to see. I'm not going to pretend like I've always been a big Moon Knight fan, but I'm glad Marvel made a show about this relatively obscure hero. Oscar Isaac's acting is what really makes this show work. Seeing him transform between characters mid-sentence is cool to see, and his casting was a fantastic choice. My biggest gripe with this show was the finale, especially where they just cut out the climax and skip to the end. I get they have been doing that before where another personality takes over to protect the other ones, but it's still the big finale and they just cut out overcoming the conflict. Anyways, besides that, I really enjoyed him teaming up with Layla in the end, and the time jumping scene is just beautiful. The main theme is some of the best music in a Marvel project I've ever heard. It left me humming it well after the show ended. Moon Knight was a great watch, and I truly recommend it for someone trying to get into the MCU. A tier. Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. This movie is a mixed bag for me. On one hand, I really enjoyed the camera work, daring thrills, and unique moments that director Sam Raimi brought to the table. But on the other hand, the whole movie felt a little held back and shallow. I know most people online's biggest complaint was that there wasn't enough different universes when it's called the Multiverse of Madness, but I felt there wasn't enough character relevant for Strange. The recurring question was if he's happy. At the end of the movie, Doctor Strange accepts his love Christine is meant to be with someone else, and accepts humility by recognizing Wong as the Sorcerer Supreme instead of himself. But wait, wasn't him being humbled the character arc of the first movie, after losing his hands and having to be taught how to use them again? You could say he learned to let go and trust America Chavez to handle her powers, but he also did that in Infinity War, letting go of the Time Stone and trusting Tony to save the universe. On another note, Wanda as a villain worked for me. It is a shame that the viewers who haven't seen Wandavision would be pretty confused why she's trying to get the kids the audience haven't heard from before, but that's more of an issue with the planning of the universe and Disney Plus, because Elizabeth Olsen did a great job with the performance. The last thing I want to touch on was the Illuminati scene. I still see this entire sequence as a sort of cheap fan service Easter egg extravaganza, but my god, was it a wild experience to see in theaters. And it seems like that's what the writer was going for, so
Good job.
Doctor Strange 2 had its fair share of highs and lows, which is why I place it on the upper end of the middle tiers, B tier. Ms. Marvel. This was a fun show. I enjoyed Kamala Khan as a character. The chemistry of her family was some of the best, most believable in the entire MCU. There were some really creative elements with the animation in the first few episodes, which was cool to see even though I felt it was a little over the top and abandoned later on. It was interesting to see the real-life historical events of the partition of India intertwined with the fantastical MCU setting. I also enjoyed seeing Kamala grow more confident in her abilities, from being breathless jogging around outside the beginning of the show to taking down opponents swiftly later on. That does bring me to her powers and how they changed significantly from the stretchy arms in the comics to purple hard light constructs. It doesn't bother me too much, but it does take some getting used to if you're familiar with the old powers. I enjoyed the teen hijinks and struggling to hide her secret identity, which is rare in the MCU. This show reminded me of great Spider-Man shows in that regard. Once again, its biggest weakness are the villains, who tend to be cartoonishly evil here. Maybe it's more social commentary, which is fine, but I do think it could have been handled better. And who could forget Bruno? All in all, Ms. Marvel was a good show. High B tier. Thor: Love and Thunder. So this film was a bit of a doozy. I don't hate it, but it's a Marvel movie that leans more into comedy, but the problem is most of the jokes aren't funny. Take the screaming goats, for example. The goats are introduced as a present for Thor for saving the temple, kind of. But once we see that the goats are annoying and really the people giving Thor the goats were really just trying to get rid of him, that's funny. But then the goats just keep on screaming and screaming and screaming and screaming. You get the point. Comedy is subjective, but it's a shame that the comedy writing for this movie wasn't good. Pair that with the lackluster CGI due to severely overworked and underappreciated visual effects artists, and you get a lackluster film. These artists, by the way, are then laughed at by the director for unfinished work when the artists are impossibly asked to do a million different tasks at once for multiple projects. It's absurd. The movie is disappointing because I know Marvel can do better than this, and I certainly know Taika Waititi can do better than this. For positives, Jane Foster coming back as Mighty Thor was cool. Her struggle and choice to use her powers to save people at the expense of her life to cancer was great. That's interesting stuff. Her trying to come up with a catchphrase was a little cringeworthy, but made sense being new to superheroing. Lastly, I think Christian Bale's score was fantastic, but severely underused. This movie failed at what it set out to do, and is a culmination of people's most prominent complaints of Phase 4, from spotty CGI to bad writing. I feel bad for Chris Hemsworth, Natalie Portman, and all the people who put in genuine effort but were let down by higher-ups. While I don't despise this movie, it certainly is the weakest of Phase 4. D tier. She-Hulk, Attorney at Law. So this show was alright. When it released, it seemed like most of the internet started dogpiling on it, saying that the show was atrocious. At first, I didn't like it. Watching episodes kind of felt like homework. I didn't like how Jen was mean to Hulk.
Bruh.
He was just trying to help her get used to her powers. I don't know, maybe he was mansplaining. But jokes aside, my main problem was the acting from the supporting cast. There was an episode where this guy is tricked into thinking he was dating Megan Thee Stallion by a shapeshifter, and he foolishly gives her a ton of money. I get the joke as the guy is too in his own head to think he had a chance with her, but the way the characters react to this, albeit stupid mistake, is like they're on a Disney Channel sitcom.
You think that Dennis Bukowski would believe that he could actually pull Megan Thee Stallion? Do you guys think I have a shot with the real Megan Thee Stallion? Should I go back?
Besides that, the show is creative with its legal cases, which fit the universe and provides good world building. Seriously, you have Sorcerer Wong going to court to sue someone for using magic for profit, the case I just mentioned about an Asgardian posing as a celebrity to get money from this buffoon, and a client suing a superhero costume tailor for a faulty product. The cases tie in aspects from other parts of the universe, and it's great. The villains are this group of online troll incel type guys, and yeah, that's pretty accurate to the types of villains she would encounter in real life. Now I know some people took this as, oh, the writers are saying if we don't like the show, we're sexist pigs. But that's not the case. You can dislike the show without being sexist. There are a vocal minority of people that hate women superheroes in general, to whom I say,
Stop it. Get some help.
but I wouldn't feel like the showrunners are roping people who aren't fans of the show in with them. Plus, She-Hulk shows what some stand-up guys are like here. Sure, the show wasn't necessarily my cup of tea, but that's okay. A few episodes in, and that's when it hit me. This was never supposed to be a superhero show with lawyers. It's a lawyer show with superheroes. In fact, Jen said it from the very beginning. It's faithful to the source material. She-Hulk comics are about being a lawyer, her love life, and breaking the fourth wall. And that's what happens in this show. But as it went on, it grew on me. I was invested in seeing her grow as a person and learn to trust guys. One of the people she learns to trust is Daredevil, who I thought was handled well and had actual chemistry with Jen. The line of Daredevil saying that Jen could use both her legal abilities and super abilities to help people was great. I know some people complain there wasn't enough Daredevil in the show, but come on, the show is called She-Hulk. Luckily, he was great in the brief time he appeared in the show. The fourth wall breaking ending felt a little off and jarring, but still faithful to the source material. So while I can't say She-Hulk was for me, it was still a decent show that expands the Marvel Universe. C tier. Werewolf by Night. This blew me away. From the eerie early 20th century monster movie aesthetic to the enjoyable characters and pretty tense action, Werewolf by Night has a lot to love. I was not expecting much from this, but I ended up really enjoying it. I bet you're starting to notice a theme here. The whole opening scene when the monster hunters introduce themselves is great. I'm interested to see what Marvel does with this special presentation format next, because I think it works to get more niche projects to see the light of day, so long as they don't oversaturate them with shows that would negate the special presentation. I enjoyed the performances from Gael Garcia Bernal as Jack Russell and Laura Donnelly as Elsa Bloodstone, and especially Harriet Sanson as Versa Bloodstone, who is chewing the scenes. With these great characters, I'm excited to see how they tie into the rest of the universe. A tier. Black Panther Wakanda Forever. This movie is special. There was a lot of pressure on director Ryan Coogler and crew to deliver on a sequel that would surpass the original, even with the tragic passing of Chadwick Boseman in 2020, which happened after the original script was written that would heavily feature the actor reprising his role. Combine that with having to film mostly during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, and that's a tall order to even make this movie. But despite these obstacles, the film really delivered. I enjoyed it better than the first. It's action-packed, beautiful, it's heartbreaking, and it just works for me. Tenoch Huerta does a great job as a truly intimidating Namor, and I'm excited that they were able to embrace the goofier part of this character, like the little winged feet, and make it look cool. It's not a perfect movie. Some green screen is obvious, plot can make you scratch your head, and I laughed at this line. Oh shit, she got an Iron Man suit! But not in the way they intended. Back to the good. The Talocan warriors were frightening. I genuinely thought Okoye was gonna die in this scene. I respect the decision to not recast Chadwick Boseman. I think Shuri works as the new Black Panther with a darker side due to her trauma, but the standout was Angela Bassett as Queen Ramonda, who goes all out with the performance. Wakanda Forever was everything I wanted from this movie and more. S tier. So that just about wraps up Phase 4. But wait, what about the Gotg Holiday special and I Am Groot? Well, James Gunn stated that the holiday special is more of a passion project he quickly whipped up, and I Am Groot is really more like a nice thing just to fill space in Disney Plus, like Star Wars blips. It's my list after all. But if you want to hear my thoughts on these two really fast, the holiday special is pretty weird, even for a Guardians property, but it's wholesome and I'm glad it exists. I Am Groot, it was cute. I'd put them both around low B tier, high C tier, because they're nice and all, but there's not really a lot of substance. Okay, so looking back at Phase 4, I'd say pretty good. To give my brief overall thoughts, there's more variety of content here, from a decades of television sitcom mystery, to an odyssey with hints of horror, to a comedy legal drama. There's more range of projects than the usual action adventure with a few comedies. There's also more projects in general. The number of releases each year is skyrocketed. There's so many MCU movies and now shows that I think you can pick and choose which ones you want to see without missing the larger story being told, with some exceptions. I think the costume department did a fantastic job and gave us some great looking suits that weren't afraid to go comic accurate. The sense of scale feels much more low stakes and projects feel less connected. When thinking this, you have to remember that the Infinity Saga was built up for 22 movies. Phase 1 wasn't as connected or high stakes, for example. So naturally things have to downscale and the stakes are lower to raise the stakes later on. That being said, the projects I liked the most had some kind of connection to the larger story of the multiverse, like No Way Home and Loki. When people say the MCU is dead, I think it's an overreaction. To me, Phase 2, for example, has higher highs and lower lows. So I can understand why people say Phase 4 as a whole was mediocre, especially with how many I ranked in B tier, but I can't agree that it was horrible or even bad. Being mediocre or mid is kind of a problem in its own right, because things can get stale, but I'm not worried about that moving forward. The thing with a cinematic universe is there's always more content on the horizon. Although Quantumania was in general a misfire, Guardians 3 was heart-wrenching and phenomenal. I'm looking forward to Secret Invasion, and I'm sure things will start to hit their stride around the middle of Phase 5. However, I believe the move to cut back on the amount of shows and movies going forward each year is the right choice, to focus on quality instead of quantity, and more importantly, give the overworked VFX artists a little bit more of a breather. So there's my ranking. Do you agree with this ranking? Disagree? Leave a comment to let me know, as well as your own ranking or which movie or TV show was your favorite. Don't forget to like the video and share, as it helps me out, especially with how much time it takes to make these longer videos. I was originally going to make a video on ranking every Marvel project in 2021, but Phase 4 was done before I knew it. Time flies. Anyways, I'm Iron Elephant. Stay tuned. See ya!